Lewis Hamilton has been removed from Ferrari, meaning that after the summer break, he will no longer wear the famous red suit. But what lies behind this shocking decision? Who is going to replace him in the cockpit? And which team will Hamilton join for the next chapter of his career? Don't miss a second. Stay until the very end, because the answers will leave you stunned. Subscribe only if you want to stay updated with the latest breaking. The entire Formula One landscape has been shaken by the implosion of an alliance that, not long ago, was celebrated as one of the most ambitious projects in modern motorsport. Lewis Hamilton's association with Ferrari has ended with stunning abruptness, the decision executed during the summer interval in a manner that few could have foreseen when he first stepped into the red overalls with the promise of reviving Maranello's legacy. What was once painted as a perfect union, the sport's most decorated competitor linking up with its most storied team, has collapsed into turmoil, leaving supporters bewildered, commentators scrambling for explanations, and rival organizations sensing opportunity amid the chaos. When the partnership was announced, it carried the aura of inevitability, as if fate itself had scripted the move. Hamilton in Ferrari red was supposed to symbolize the rebirth of a dynasty, the chance to add another monumental chapter to his extraordinary career while restoring Ferrari to the summit. Yet the fairy tale has ended before it could even begin in earnest. Beneath the surface, friction had been growing, and at the heart of the breakdown was a clause buried in the fine print of Hamilton's contract. Ferrari's lawyers, hardened by the disappointments of recent years, insisted on a strict safeguard, a minimum tally of points by mid-season, or the team would reserve the right to terminate the agreement. It was a clause Hamilton considered a formality, but as the races unfolded, the numbers turned against him. His results painted a sobering picture. Podiums were few, qualifying performances swung wildly, unforced mistakes crept into weekends, and most damaging of all, Charles Leclerc consistently outscored him. The expectations that Ferrari had built around Hamilton's arrival never materialized, and as the summer break approached, the threshold went unmet. For Ferrari's leadership, already uneasy about his impact on the team's culture, the clause became not just an option but a lifeline. They pulled the trigger with ruthless efficiency, ending a partnership that had barely begun. But to reduce the collapse to statistics would be to ignore the deeper fault lines. Hamilton had arrived determined not only to drive but to transform. Subscribe only if you want to stay updated with the latest breaking. Drawing on his years of dominance at Mercedes, he pushed aggressively for reforms in how Ferrari operated, challenging strategy calls, questioning the decision-making hierarchy, and criticizing the culture of hesitation that has long plagued the Scuderia. Younger engineers and analysts saw him as a catalyst for long-overdue change, someone willing to confront the inefficiencies no one else dared to name. Yet for others inside Maranello, particularly those who considered themselves guardians of Ferrari's traditions, Hamilton's approach was abrasive, even disrespectful. To them, his demands represented an outsider attempting to impose his will on an institution that prided itself on history and identity. The relationship grew increasingly strained as the season progressed. Each poor qualifying lap widened the cracks, each missed opportunity intensified the mistrust, and every defeat fueled resentment on both sides. The pivotal blow came at Silverstone. Hamilton had built the weekend up as his moment to silence doubts, but the race unraveled into disappointment. Tires degraded, the pit wall hesitated, and a late mistake sealed the outcome. What should have been a triumphant reminder of his greatness became further proof to Ferrari's hierarchy that their gamble was slipping away. Within weeks, the decision was made. The clause was enforced, and the split was executed with a swiftness that stunned the paddock. The repercussions have been nothing short of explosive. Fans who once envisioned Hamilton delivering championships in scarlet are left feeling betrayed, unable to comprehend how such a monumental project was abandoned so quickly. Ferrari loyalists are divided, some applauding the team for making a hard but necessary call, others condemning the leadership for discarding a legend with such cold calculation. Across the media, the story dominates headlines, with pundits arguing over whether Ferrari acted with strategic foresight or panicked at the first sign of trouble. Rival teams, meanwhile, have been galvanized by the spectacle, speculating on what Hamilton's sudden availability could mean for the balance of power across the grid. For Hamilton, the fallout is deeply personal. Subscribe only if you want to stay updated with the latest breaking. Those within his inner circle suggest he feels betrayed not only by the clause but by what he sees as a lack of patience and faith. He has reminded confidants that success is rarely instant, that his own Mercedes era began with growing pains before blossoming into dominance. Ferrari's unwillingness to endure those early struggles has left him disillusioned and determined to prove his critics wrong. Retirement has been whispered about, but few believe Hamilton will allow his career to close on such terms. Instead, speculation surges: a reunion with Mercedes, a daring leap to Red Bull, or a new chapter with Aston Martin. Each possibility carries intrigue, and the uncertainty surrounding his future has only amplified the drama. Ferrari, meanwhile, has taken a gamble that could haunt them long after this season. By severing ties, they may believe they have cut their losses, but in discarding Hamilton they have ignited a controversy that threatens to overshadow everything else they achieve. What was meant to be the start of a renaissance is now remembered as a fleeting and failed experiment, a dream extinguished by impatience and mistrust. The image of Hamilton walking away from Ferrari Red will linger as a symbol of wasted potential, of an opportunity squandered before it had the chance to mature. What remains is a story of pride, ambition, and the ruthless nature of Formula One, where reputations and legacies are meaningless without results. Hamilton and Ferrari were supposed to write history together. Instead, their names are bound by a cautionary tale that will echo through the sport for years, a reminder that even the most promising alliances can collapse under the weight of expectation, misalignment, and a lack of faith. Subscribe only if you want to stay updated with the latest breaking. Beneath the carefully polished image Ferrari projected to the outside world, the inner workings of the team were falling apart in ways that no set of statistics could ever reveal. The highly anticipated partnership between Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc, once sold as the perfect combination of Hamilton's unparalleled experience and Leclerc's youthful aggression, had already begun to rot from the inside. What should have been a union built on mutual respect and complementary strengths quickly spiraled into resentment, mistrust, and a constant tug-of-war over the very direction of the team. The optimism that once surrounded their pairing dissolved into open conflict, leaving the garage divided and morale crumbling. Inside post-session meetings, discussions that were supposed to be focused on performance became battlegrounds for competing philosophies. Hamilton repeatedly pushed for sweeping modifications aimed at stabilizing the car under braking and ensuring adaptability across changing conditions, drawing on his years of experience mastering unpredictable machinery. Leclerc, however, dismissed those adjustments, insisting on preserving the sharp, aggressive responsiveness at the front end that allowed him to attack corners with precision. Their demands were irreconcilable, leaving the engineers torn between two vastly different schools of thought. As they attempted to satisfy both, development splintered, countless hours were wasted, and the car's progress stalled. Instead of building momentum, Ferrari was being dragged in opposite directions, and frustration began to harden into hostility. Leclerc, who had long carried the identity of Ferrari's future star, increasingly felt as though his authority was being eroded. He confided to executives that Hamilton was dismantling the culture rather than strengthening it, insisting that the seven-time champion's presence was undermining the team's stability rather than inspiring improvement. The discord didn't stop with the drivers. Hamilton's relationship with team principal Frédéric Vasseur followed a similar trajectory, from promising at the start to strained as the season unfolded. At first, Vasseur encouraged Hamilton's frank observations, even urging him to compile his ideas in structured memos that laid bare Ferrari's shortcomings in organization and execution. Initially, those writings were treated as bold and constructive, a potential roadmap to reform. But as results failed to reflect any tangible progress, the perception of those same memos shifted dramatically. They were no longer viewed as guidance but as veiled accusations, critiques so pointed that they seemed to undermine Vasseur's authority. Hamilton's push for accountability, once seen as leadership, was increasingly portrayed as interference. Within Ferrari's walls, murmurs grew louder that Hamilton was stretching beyond the boundaries of his role. His conduct during strategy meetings only reinforced that impression. Sources described him openly challenging decisions in front of staff, raising questions with a bluntness that cut through the room and left others stunned. At Mercedes, where open debate was part of the culture, such behavior was normalized and even encouraged. At Ferrari, however, a team steeped in hierarchy and rigid authority, his actions were seen as insubordination, a public challenge to the chain of command that made senior figures deeply uncomfortable. For Vasseur, already burdened by relentless pressure from Chairman John Elkann and a board desperate for results, the situation became suffocating. Meetings turned tense, arguments erupted, and sources claimed that clashes between Hamilton and Vasseur grew heated. Hamilton demanded immediate explanations for strategic blunders, refusing to wait for carefully crafted justifications, while Vasseur struggled to contain the fallout and maintain his grip on authority. Each confrontation left him looking weaker, His control eroded in front of the very staff he was supposed to lead. The image of unity Ferrari tried to maintain on the outside was crumbling within, replaced by the unmistakable sense of a team imploding under the weight of its own internal strife. What was supposed to be Ferrari's great rebirth had devolved into chaos. Leclerc, unwilling to surrender his position as Ferrari's golden child, grew increasingly hostile toward a teammate he believed was dismantling the environment around him. Hamilton, refusing to compromise, insisted that radical disruption was the only way forward, even if it meant tearing down traditions along the way. Vasseur, trapped between a boardroom demanding success, a star driver exerting pressure from one side, and a homegrown talent pushing from the other, found himself powerless to restore order. Instead of synergy, Ferrari was fractured, consumed by ego battles, conflicting visions, and a culture war that left the Scuderia not on the verge of resurgence but teetering dangerously close to collapse. The events at Spa became the breaking point, the moment when all of Ferrari's doubts about Lewis Hamilton crystallized into an irreversible decision. He arrived in Belgium desperate to reset a season already clouded by frustration and missed opportunities, but instead the weekend unraveled into disaster. A spin during qualifying left him far from where he needed to be, and the race itself only deepened the sense of decline. The car looked heavy, unresponsive, and incapable of delivering the pace required. What should have been a chance to silence critics became evidence, in Ferrari's eyes, that Hamilton was failing to deliver on the promises of his deal. On the outside, the team spoke about regrouping and steady progress, but inside Maranello the mood was very different. Executives dissected the numbers, studied the fine print of his agreement, and decided the performance clauses had not been met. The lawyers were brought in, and the course was set. As the summer break began, Hamilton was called back to Italy for what he believed would be a technical debrief. Instead, he was confronted with a cold, clinical meeting that ended his time with Ferrari in under half an hour. Termination papers were placed in front of him. Shocked and angry, he fought back, insisting that no driver could have achieved more with a car that consistently underdelivered. He reminded them of the promises made when he signed, that Ferrari had failed to match his commitment with equal machinery. But the management, unmoved, pointed at the data, at the explicit contractual language, at the results. Their tone was detached, unyielding. By the time he stepped out of the gates of the factory, Hamilton was no longer part of Ferrari. The news detonated like an explosion across the sport. Media outlets scrambled to cover the bombshell, fans reacted with fury and disbelief, and rival teams quickly began calculating what it meant for the future. But the story did not stop there. What set the paddock alight were the whispers that began circulating almost immediately. Barely 2 days later, Hamilton was seen entering a discreet Monaco hotel where Toto Wolff, his longtime mentor and the man behind his greatest triumphs at Mercedes, was staying. Sources claim they spent hours in private talks, fueling the wild but irresistible idea of a reunion between the driver and the team that had defined an era of dominance. For Mercedes, the situation is complicated. Their long-term vision has been built around George Russell, a driver who has been positioned as the future cornerstone, alongside Andrea Kimi Antonelli, a teenage sensation many believe is destined to be the next great star. Yet the pull of Hamilton is undeniable. 6 championships, countless victories, and a legacy intertwined with the team's most successful period in history. His return would be more than just a sporting gamble. For Wolff, it would mean restoring an alliance that had been built on loyalty, trust, and shared history. For Hamilton, it offers a path to redemption, a chance to end his career with pride rather than the bitterness of being discarded by Ferrari. The possible consequences of such a move are immense. Would Russell accept sharing the spotlight once again with a driver whose presence still commands global attention? Would Antonelli's carefully planned rise to Formula One be delayed or reshaped if Hamilton re-entered the fold? Would Ferrari eventually come to regret cutting ties so abruptly if their former driver started winning again in silver? These questions dominate headlines, podcasts, and paddock conversations, and nobody has clear answers. The saga has already taken on the tone of a drama that feels larger than sport. Formula One has always thrived on rivalries, betrayals, and unexpected twists, and Hamilton's abrupt dismissal followed by secret meetings with Wolff fits perfectly into that narrative. It is not simply about contracts and performance, it is about pride, ambition, and legacy. The image of Hamilton walking away from Maranello, only to be seen days later plotting his next step with the man who once guided him to glory, feels almost cinematic. What seemed unimaginable weeks ago now feels dangerously close to reality. Every rumor, every whisper, every supposed sighting is dissected endlessly, feeding an atmosphere of suspense that grips fans and insiders alike. Hamilton's next move will not only decide how his career is remembered, it could reshape the balance of power in Formula One for years. Until the truth emerges, the world waits breathlessly, captivated by a saga that embodies everything dramatic, emotional, and compelling about this sport. Speculation has spread like wildfire across the paddock, and the conversation always circles back to one name: Lewis Hamilton. Insiders insist Toto Wolff has been weighing unconventional approaches that could open the door for a sensational reunion, even if only for a short spell. The idea most frequently whispered is a single-season agreement, a carefully engineered bridge designed to carry Mercedes through the transition period before the new technical framework of 2026, while also creating the breathing space young Kimi Antonelli desperately needs as he edges closer to the highest level. For Mercedes, the logic behind such a bold step is not difficult to understand. Hamilton's return would immediately energize an organization that has been struggling to recapture its old rhythm. His presence alone would lift morale in every department. The engineers who once produced dominant machinery would be reminded of their own brilliance. The mechanics who celebrated championship after championship at his side would find renewed purpose. The strategists who orchestrated unforgettable victories would be driven to prove themselves again. It would be more than nostalgia. It would be a strategic reset, a psychological boost that could reignite ambition across Brackley and remind rivals that Mercedes still knows how to fight at the sharp end. For Hamilton, the emotional stakes could not be higher. His move to Ferrari was supposed to be a rebirth, a fairy tale parallel to Schumacher's revival of the Scuderia. Instead, it collapsed under conflicting priorities, political tension, and disappointing results. What was meant to be a crowning final act has left a bitter taste. Returning to Mercedes would give him the chance to reclaim control of his narrative. It would be a way to choose his own ending, to leave the sport not as a driver pushed out but as a champion who walked away on his own terms. It would be redemption wrapped in silver paint, a chance to silence critics and prove that his legend remains untarnished. While Mercedes quietly plots, Ferrari is left scrambling in the aftermath. Their official statement, heavy with vague phrases about mutual respect and diverging visions, did little to hide the chaos unfolding behind closed doors. Corporate partners who invested millions into the Hamilton project are furious. Entire marketing campaigns, international tours, and sponsorship deals built around the image of Hamilton in Ferrari red have evaporated. Executives who gambled on his arrival to revive the Scuderia's global brand are now forced to explain to shareholders why their investment dissolved before it had the chance to deliver. The fans' reaction has been even more visceral. The Tifosi had convinced themselves Hamilton would be the man to restore Ferrari to its former greatness. They believed they were about to witness history, a champion in red leading the team back to glory. Now those dreams have turned to ashes. Social media has exploded with anger, hashtags denouncing the leadership, and demands for accountability at the very top. For supporters, this is more than disappointment. It feels like betrayal, as though a promise to reignite the legacy of Ferrari has been broken. Inside Maranello, however, the mood is far more complicated. Beneath the storm of public fury, there is a layer of relief. Charles Leclerc now emerges as the clear centerpiece of Ferrari's future. The hierarchy is no longer split, no longer clouded by the shadow of a global superstar. For Frédéric Vasseur, the end of the Hamilton chapter allows him to assert his authority and push forward with a single vision. No more compromises, no divided loyalties. Ferrari can build around one leader, one philosophy, and one direction. Still, clarity does not automatically translate into progress. Ferrari continues to wrestle with inconsistency in car development, a tendency to falter in high-pressure strategy calls, and a reputation for letting opportunities slip away. Without Hamilton's experience and composure to draw on, they risk exposing old weaknesses when the battle against Red Bull, Mercedes, and McLaren intensifies. What they have gained in harmony may not be enough to replace what they have lost in stature and resilience. The rest of the grid watches intently, fully aware that these two narratives are not isolated. They will shape the sport's landscape. If Hamilton rejoins Mercedes, it will not just be about one more contract. It will send shockwaves across the championship, altering the psychology of rivals and giving Brackley fresh authority. For Hamilton, it will be a chance to step off the stage as a legend in control of his destiny. For Ferrari, it could either mark the beginning of a sharper, more unified project under Leclerc's leadership or trap them in yet another cycle of instability and wasted opportunity. This is what makes Formula One more than a series of races. It is a collision of ambition, ego, politics, and legacy. Hamilton's possible comeback with Mercedes is not a simple career move, it is a defiant act of self-determination. Ferrari's fracture is not just a driver departure, it is the collapse of an idea, the death of a dream that millions of fans had already begun to live in their imaginations. And as these stories unfold in parallel, the sport reminds the world why it is so captivating. Because every rumor, every decision, every twist has the power to rewrite history in ways that no one can predict. Lewis Hamilton, standing as one of the greatest figures the sport has ever produced, cannot be challenged, but the sudden implosion of his time with Ferrari has created a storm that leaves his future hanging in a fragile balance. For years he was the embodiment of consistency, domination, and ambition, a man who turned impossible targets into milestones and who carried himself with the weight of history on his shoulders. His trophies, his records, and his influence ensure that no twist of fate can erase what he has already built. Yet the sight of him leaving Maranello with no deal, wounded pride, and questions swirling around his next move has become one of the most jarring and dramatic moments Formula One has seen in a generation. Conversations in the paddock, in media rooms, and across fan communities now circle endlessly around the same burning topic. Where does Hamilton go from here? The most obvious possibility lies with Mercedes, the team that shaped him into the symbol of an era, the organization with which he achieved unparalleled dominance. A reunion would be a seismic event, full of narrative power, the kind of storyline that would electrify fans and give the team's workforce an injection of belief that could reignite their push for the front. But behind the dream is a complex reality. George Russell has waited patiently, positioning himself as the future leader of Mercedes. To bring Hamilton back would mean rewriting that hierarchy, potentially creating tension in a garage that has worked hard to maintain unity. Would Hamilton's presence inspire or destabilize? Would the factory view him as the savior who could steer them into the new regulations, or as a shadow hanging over Russell's ambitions? The decision is nothing short of monumental. Other possibilities, though less predictable, are no less intriguing. Rivals can hardly ignore the shockwaves. Red Bull may publicly laugh at the suggestion, but the idea of placing Hamilton alongside Verstappen is one that would generate unprecedented spectacle, a rivalry turned into an internal duel. Aston Martin, armed with resources and determination but still seeking legitimacy as a true frontrunner, would see Hamilton as the ultimate validation of their project. McLaren, the team where his career began, could be tempted by the poetry of closing the circle with a homecoming. Even Audi, preparing its much-anticipated debut, recognizes the impact of starting its journey with Hamilton as the cornerstone, a decision that would elevate their credibility instantly. Every option carries its own risks and rewards, and every whisper of negotiation fuels the sense of chaos and possibility. Yet lingering over all these scenarios is a possibility so stark it feels almost unbearable, that Hamilton decides he has had enough, that the rejection from Ferrari convinces him to step away altogether. The thought of him leaving not in triumph but in turmoil is one that sends shivers through the sport. Fans who have celebrated his victories for more than a decade would feel robbed of the farewell they imagined, deprived of a final crescendo worthy of his legend. For Formula One itself, losing Hamilton in such circumstances would be catastrophic, stripping the championship of a figure whose influence stretches beyond racing into culture, fashion, activism, and global recognition. His absence would create a void impossible to replace in the short term, leaving the grid poorer not just in talent but in identity. The decision by Ferrari has already split the world of motorsport down the middle. To some, it was an act of strength, a statement that the team comes before any individual, however iconic. To others, it was an act of self-destruction, a reckless dismissal of the one man who might have reshaped the team from the inside. Did Ferrari free themselves from a disruptive voice, or did they throw away the opportunity to evolve under the guidance of someone who knows what it takes to build a dynasty? The consequences of this choice will echo for years, and every success or failure Ferrari experiences from now on will be judged through the lens of this break. Hamilton now stands in a moment of extraordinary consequence. While others take advantage of the summer pause to rest and recharge, he faces decisions that will define not only the conclusion of his career but the shape of the sport itself. Returning to Mercedes would offer the chance to finish unfinished business, to close the chapter of a dynasty with one final blaze of glory. Choosing a new destination would be a declaration of defiance, proof that even rejection cannot dull his hunger or stop him from chasing fresh battles. And leaving entirely would be the most radical of all choices, one that would signal control, a refusal to allow anyone else to write the end of his story. This upheaval has turned the season on its head. The championship itself seems secondary compared to the suspense surrounding Hamilton's next move. Every rumor is dissected, every sighting interpreted, every cryptic remark magnified into a potential clue. Formula One has always thrived on unpredictability, but rarely has it been gifted a narrative so rich, so compelling, and so capable of shifting the balance of power across the grid. Whatever decision Hamilton makes, its impact will not only redefine his legacy but also reshape the sport for years, ensuring that his influence continues to echo long after the final lap of his final race.